We're Christian soldiers marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe. Forward into battle, see his banners go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Oh, for a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by every foe, that will not tremble on the brink of any earthly woe, that will not murmur or complain beneath a chastening rod, but in the hour of grief or pain will lean upon its God. A faith that shines more bright and clear when tempest rage without, that when in danger knows no fear, in darkness feels no doubt. Lord, give us such a faith as this, and then whate'er may come, we'll taste and hear the hallowed bliss of an eternal home. A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a never-dying soul to save, and fit it for the sky, to serve the present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh, may it all my powers engage to do my Master's will. Arm me with jealous care, as in thy sight to live, and o'er thy servant, Lord, prepare a strict account to give. Help me to watch and pray, and on thyself rely, assured if I my trust betray, I shall forever die. Rise up, O man of God, have done with lesser things, give heart and mind and soul and strength to serve the King of Kings. Rise up, O man of God, his kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and end the night of wrong. Rise up, O man of God, the church for you doth wait, her strength unequal to her task. Rise up and make her great. Lift high the cross of Christ, tread where his feet have trod, as brothers of the Son of Man, rise up, O men of God.
Good evening. Let's edify the saints with professionalism and shenanigans. There might be a few.
That's my line.
Yeah, but you're not here.
I'm a ghost.
Yeah, so burp somebody somewhere else.
Okay.
Father, we thank thee for the night and for the pleasant morning light, for rest and food and loving care, and all that makes the day so fair. Father, excuse me, help us to do the things we should, to be to others kind and good, in all we do and work or play, to grow more loving every day. Good evening, Kat. Good to see you. Hey, Rob. Good to see you as well. Ruel, good to have you watching us from the Philippines. How are you this morning, my brother? CJ, my name's Levi.
Hey, Ezra. Hey, Ezra. Can you give me my
I wonder where Sam is. He should be here by now.
and so
Ugh. Got my laptop already here for me to. use for our topics tonight. Well, let's see here. Do you have the Pearly White City, CJ? I don't think you do, but you might. Lovely fire, by the way. O'Shea should be joining us soon. Got Ezra on tech, CJ in the background helping out as well. Oh, that feels better. Are you sure you meant to share that whole thing? All righty, you do have one. There's a Oh, happy and beautiful city, whose builder and ruler is God. John saw it descending from heaven, when Patmos in exile he trod. Its high massive walls is of jasper, the city itself is pure gold. And when my frail tent here is folded, mine eyes shall its glory behold. In that bright city, early white city, I have a mansion, a robe and a crown. Now I am watching, waiting and longing for the white city John saw coming down. No sin is allowed in that city, and nothing defiling or mean. No pain and no sickness can enter. No crape on the doorknob is seen. Earth's sorrows and cares are forgotten. No tempter is there to annoy. No parting words ever are spoken. There's nothing to hurt and destroy. In that bright city, pearly white city, I have a mansion, a robe and a crown. Now I am watching, waiting and longing for the white city John saw coming down. No heartaches are known in that city. No tears ever moisten the eye. There's no disappointments in heaven, no envy and strife in the sky. The saints are all sanctified holy. They live in sweet harmony there. My heart is now set on that city, and someday its blessing I'll share. In that bright city, pearly white city, I have a mansion, a robe and a crown. Now I am watching, waiting and longing for the white city John saw coming down. Amen. we lost somebody already. We had 4 viewers, now we're down to 3. Ezra, you better get Sam in here.
I sent it to him in Messenger.
CJ.
Yeah.
I'd like to have you, if you would, pull up and have ready one of our outlines from the any one of the gospel meetings that we've done, gospel edification meetings.
Okay.
Meanwhile, I'm going to be doing. You don't have to put it up yet, but I just want to show an example to try to help Sam a little bit later. Meanwhile, I'm going to do the song entitled "I Love the Lord." Let's see if CJ has that one.
Nada.
Not tonight, huh? Do you have that one? I love the Lord, for he died my soul to save. On Calvary, his delight he freely gave. From realms above, Jesus freely came to die, that I might live someday with him on high. I love the Lord, he has been so good to me. He gave his life from sin to set me free. No greater love than his could ever be. I love the Lord because he first loved me. I love the Lord, for he saved me, the lost from sin. He gave them life to be whole and free again, to live on high with him, with him nevermore to die. Oh, praise his name. We'll see him by and by. I love the Lord, for he died my sin. I will get it right yet. Mm-hmm. I love the Lord, he has been so good to me. He gave his life from sin to set me free. No greater love than his could ever be. I love the Lord because he first loved me. I love the Lord for his love so full and free. He taught us why that our love like his should be. To be like him and compassion freely give. Oh, bless his name. We then with him could live. I love the Lord. He has been so good to me. He gave his life from sin to set me free. No greater love than his could ever be. I love the Lord because he first loved me. All right. My sinuses are starting to plug up. We had request earlier this evening during the reading stream to look at the idea of, or what our thoughts were rather, on movies wherein the actors and actresses portrayed characters, and they would call people father, as in they would call the religious preacher in their pastor or reverend or father. And of course, there would be use of the Lord's name in vain in some of these as well. I have more problem with movies that contain uses of the Lord's name in vain, cussing and cursing, as well as explicit scenes, than I do with them with people calling a preacher pastor or father, or indeed even reverend. Hello, Sister Love. Good to see you. Our new sister at our congregation, her name is Joan, has cancer. But here is why that, and let's get into the idea of father, because Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 23, if Ezra will bring that up for me. Matthew chapter 23. I think I'm going to have to wait for him to actually get the Bible e-sword in there. There we are. Let's begin here in 1. We're going to read further than that, but let's just begin 1 and read until I determine to stop. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do, but do not you or ye after their works, for they say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves would not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries, enlarge the borders of their garments, and love the uppermost rooms at feasts, and the chief seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the markets, and to be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But be not ye called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whosoever shall exalt him shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. And then he proceeds to go into the woes unto you, scribes and Pharisees. Let's look at this text and examine it in a few points. The first thing that we notice from this text is that Jesus begins with an object lesson. And the object lesson begins with the scribes and Pharisees who are in positions of authority. He very clearly says that in verse 2. The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. What is Moses' seat? Well, that's the position of Moses, the lawgiver. And so they sit in that seat as the leader, the religious leader of Israel, the religious leaders. By this time in Israel, what we have is the Sanhedrin, and they were judges overseeing the religious practices and day-to-day matters of the people. If you go back and you remember that Moses, his father-in-law, Ruel, saw what Moses was doing and how he would get up and sit down in the camp. Yes.
Well, wasn't it Jethro?
It's the same person.
Okay.
If you actually go in one place, it's called Jethro, and another place it's called Ruel, the high priest of Midian, or Ruel, Jethro, Ruel, Moses' father-in-law, and in another place you have Moses' wife being who was a Midianite, also being an Ethiopian. So, anyhow. You have Ruel coming, and he sees Moses get up in the morning. He sits in the seat of judgment from morning until evening with no break, essentially. He's hearing the people's cases, and he never makes it through all the cases. And he says to Moses, he says, what you're doing is not good. You're going to wear yourself out. What you need to do is choose out judges from among the people, delegate that authority, and let them take care of the small matters. And if something's too hard for them, then they bring it to you. And God puts his stamp of approval on this, plan. And so Moses chooses out 70 elders, and God takes a portion of the Spirit and puts it up on these 70 elders. And these men become judges. And that pretty much was the foundation of the Sanhedrin, which CJ might go look this up for me, but I believe means 70. I'm not 100% certain, but I believe that's what the Sanhedrin, that's what it means with Sanhedrin. Okay, so Pharisees and the Sadducees, the scribes and the Pharisees, they sit in this seat, in this exalted, hey, Gloria, in this exalted position. Now, Jesus tells them, okay, these are the religious leaders of your people, of the people. So Matthew 23 and verse 3, Jesus tells the disciples, the audience, whatever they tell you to do, go ahead and observe. Okay, but don't follow their pattern. As we come on. I don't know why, but it's not. Mine isn't scrolling with my arrow key for some reason. Oh, I know why. I hit the function key. That's why. Okay, there we go.
Yes, God.
Don't do after the works, for they say and they don't do it. Okay, so then so what we see is they bind these big heavy burdens upon the people, but they don't do a single thing. They don't do what they say. You ever met people like that? Huh. I don't know why. The Sanhedrin, yeah, Sanhedrin, neuter of a presumed derivative of a compound. Okay. Subordinate tribunal council. Doesn't really tell me much, except that it's just simply a Jewish tribunal, a Jewish council. So Jesus says, do what they tell you, but don't do as they do, because they don't do what they're preaching. They're not practicing what they preach. And the whole purpose of their works is that they might be seen to have this honor and esteem, this prestige among everybody. So they might have the place of preeminence. They make broad their phylacteries. They enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the uppermost rooms at the feasts and the chief seats in the synagogues, greetings in the markets, and they want to be called rabbi. Rabbi is the Hebrew word for master or teacher. It's a title of honor. Jesus says, don't be called rabbi, for there's only one rabbi, and he's Christ. Well, now that's kind of funny, O'Shea. Roosters and turkeys strutting around. I suppose you could look at that in that way. They're preening themselves and showing off how pretty they look, but all they are is full of sound. So Jesus says, don't call anybody rabbi or master or teacher, because there's only one, that's Christ. And notice at the end of verse 8, what does he say there? He says in verse 8, you are all brethren, or all of you are brethren. In other words, what he's saying is you're all equal. Don't be called teachers. Don't be called master. Don't hold these places of preeminence, because you're all brethren. You're all equal. One is not better than the other. Then we look at verse 9. He says, call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father, which is in heaven. So as we look at that, okay, we're not supposed to have the title of rabbi. or teacher. What about this? Does that mean we can't call our earthly dads father? Or is it more logical to think that this falls into the same category as the verse before it? As in that we shouldn't have the title of father. You see, when we look at our earthly dad, we call him father or dad, not because a title, but as a name. And yes, there is a difference. In many of the different religions, they have different names for their preachers, for example. Let's pick on the Catholics for a moment because that's one of the ones that comes quite frequently to people's mind. And you may have a Catholic priest, and his name is Father, let's say, Mulcahy, or Father McGinnis, or, something like that. Father Pierre. In that case, the father is not the name, but rather is a title. CJ says he's talking about the title, religious titles. So you're saying that it falls under the category of the previous verse, right, CJ? Now let me scroll on down to the next verse. Before we conclusively answer verse 9, let's look at verse 11 or 10 rather. Verse 10 says, "Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ." All right. So what does that tell us? What it tells us then is that we are not to be having the title of master. What is a master? Well, one may say, well, that's the person who owns slaves. Yes and no. For you see, anyone who is a teacher and who has disciples that follow his doctrine is considered a master as well. And so what we're seeing in verse 10 is that Christ is our master. And the word for master here, by the way, is kathegetes. I probably butchered that, but it's a guide, a teacher, master. And we're not to be called guides. We're not to be called teachers. We're not to be called masters in that sense. Let me use an example from the scriptures. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul chastises the Corinthians because people are, I think it's chapter 1, maybe it's chapter 3. People are saying, I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, I am of Cephas. And he says, wait, was Paul crucified for you? And what they were doing was causing divisions, and they were becoming disciples of Paul or disciples of Apollos or disciples of Peter. We have in the book of Acts disciples of John, which had to be Paul had to go and explain the gospel to them. He says, don't be called masters. If I'm going around and creating a following of me, Am I glorifying God or am I glorifying me? Thank you, CJ. 1 Corinthians 1. Darlene says he is to be glorified, honored above all. Okay, if I go and I create a following or beget a following who strives to live after my teachings, am I glorifying me or am I glorifying God? In the same manner, let's bring it down. If we become a follower of Buddha, he becomes our master, right? And Jesus says we're not to be called masters. There is only one master, and that is Christ. We shouldn't be following Paul. We shouldn't be following Cephas or Apollos, John the Baptist, or Buddha. We should be following Christ, and we definitely shouldn't be following Levi. All right, so what we have then is don't be called a teacher or a rabbi. Don't be called father. Don't be called master. Because there is only one rabbi or master or teacher, that is Christ. There is only one father, that is God. There is only one master, that is Christ. So we can understand from these passages then that these are titles. Is it wrong for us to call our father or our dad on earth father? Absolutely not. We need to be, I mean, we can call our dad father because we're not ascribing to him a religious significance or a religious title. What's also of interest is if CJ or if Ezra, or who is it, O'Shea or Ezra on the back end there?
It's me.
All right. O'Shea, would you go to verse 9 and show us from Strong's what the word for father is? Now, the word here is pater, which is really fascinating because in Italian it's pater. And that is the actual word from which father is derived. So now, apparently, this word, Strong says it's a father, literally or figuratively, more remote father or parent. But let's look at at Thayer's definition because that gets really interesting. As we look at Thayer, it's a generator or male ancestor. And as we go through looking at all the meanings of this word, that was just one. Look at verse number 2. Meaning number 2 is metaphorically, it's the originator or transmitter of anything. In 2C, you can see that it's a title of honor, such as teachers in 2C1. Teachers as those to whom pupils trace back the knowledge and training they have received. To verse 2 or 2C2, the members of the Sanhedrin, whose prerogative it was by virtue of the wisdom and experience in which they excelled to take charge of the interests of others. Gamaliel would have been considered a rabbi as well as a pater, a father. And then, of course, definition 3 was God is called the Father. And you can look through those. So we have then the differences. And as I look at Mounce's, another Greek scholar's use of the word pater, or definition rather, the very last one, which is used here in Matthew 23 and verse 9, it says it's used as an appellation of honor, or a name, a title of honor, rather. And you can see it there in Matthew 23, verse 9, and Stephen uses it in Acts 7 and verse 2 when he says, men, brethren, and fathers, hearken, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he dwelt in Haran. So you see there both the title and the title of honor, both given to the elders as well as to Abraham. So we're not to allow, or we're not to give people the title. My dad being a preacher, or me being a preacher, I'm not to have the title of father. I'm not to have the title of teacher or rabbi, and I'm definitely not to have the title of master. Because I'm just as you. I'm not worthy of the honor. I'm not worthy of that position, and I don't want it. So the reason I look at that so much right now is because it is a title. It is something that I'm not to be calling other people. Now, what about in the sense of movies? Is it wrong for us to watch movies wherein people call religious figures father? There is a part of me that wants to say yes. However, understand that movies are a depiction of the way life is in some cases, and a distraction from the way life is in other cases. Just because I watch a video does not mean that I am partaking in the sin that is in the video. Now, I have that with a caveat, because if a video has explicit scenes, or if it is of cussing and filthy language, etc., what I feed my mind is what is going to come out of my mouth. And we should be very careful about what we put in to our minds, into our hearts. If watching said movies, said entertainment, upsets you, don't watch it. Because if you do, it becomes a sin for you. Not all people are given that strength or that weakness, however you wish to look at it. It is not a it is not up to me to judge, because you're not my servant. I'm not your master. God is. You know your limits, and you know what's right for you, as in you know whether or not you can handle that. Now, if I was to invite you over for a dinner and a movie, I need to be aware of your restrictions so that I don't show you said movie that has somebody calling, has a an actor who is portraying the character calling a religious person father or reverend or pastor. Um, but there is, to a big degree, something, you need to be able to separate reality from fiction, reality from make believe. Ultimately, if I know that you have such a restriction that you're not comfortable watching that type of movie, I need to make sure that that type of a movie is not portrayed in my home while you're there with me. Um, because to do so would be cause you to sin. And we are strictly commissioned by God not to put stumbling blocks in the path of our brother. Now, remember though that I said if we watch them, it is not us who are calling these people these names. We're not partaking in their sin. And we need to make sure of that. But let's look at the idea of reverend, calling someone reverend. We know the word pastor is a office, not a title. We know the word bishop, it's an office, not a title. And if we change that office into a title, then we are doing exactly what Christ has warned us against here in Matthew 23, verses 8 through 10. Hey, Carol, thank you for being here. A pastor, a bishop, a presbyter, these are all names or descriptions, rather, of the job that a person who is older and has met certain qualifications is to be doing. A presbyter, a pastor, a bishop, an elder, these are all words for the same thing. It's a shepherd. And the Bible uses them interchangeably. The qualifications are listed in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1, I think. Did I get that one right, CJ? Is it 1? See, like I told you, I'm not um, I'm not infallible. Yes, it is Titus chapter 1. CJ asked the question, would it be considered giving approval of it?
Sorry, it was supposed to be like the idea at the end of Romans 1.
there could be a medium of giving approval to that. By purchasing or renting said videos, movies, shows. And again, I want to reiterate the fact that if a movie has cursing, or has explicit scenes, we shouldn't be watching them. When we look at Romans chapter 1, what we find is a list of categories, or a category of sins. We see those who change the truth of God into a lie, those who worship idolatry or the creatures more than the creator, those who partake in vile affections, whether it be women or men, those who don't retain God in their knowledge, those who are filled with, verse 29, filled with all unrighteousness, who are filled with fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful. Which category would calling someone father or reverend or pastor or bishop fall into? I mean, we can see where explicit scenes would fall into, because we're talking about fornication, we're talking about changing the, or rather, what is it? Yeah, changing the natural use for that which is against nature. We could throw it into the without natural affection. We could throw it in deceit. Unrighteousness, wickedness, even covetousness, and to a degree. And of course, we talk about murder, etc., etc. Deceit. So what you're saying is calling someone by their calling someone, let's say, father. Father. Why is it the only names I can come up with are Irish names? So calling someone Father Scott, for example, there we go. There's another one. Now I got a Scots name. Father Scott would fall into deceit. or are you doing something with the fornication, etc., or the explicit scenes? I missed when your comment showed up, CJ. No, that would be ignorance. Um, to someone who doesn't know the Bible, to call a religious person father, pastor, reverend, bishop, etc., is no different to them than going to a company and calling the leader of it CEO. It's for them. It's a position. It's honoring their position. It'd be like, you standing in front of the president and calling him president, President Biden. You're giving honor to that office. And so I don't see it as deceit. Now, the person who allows somebody, the religious person who allows somebody to call them such, that could be deceitful. Because they should know the scriptures enough to say what it says, call no man father. And you go around, using the title Father Scott. You see my point? They would be deceiving. They would be actually practicing the sin because they're allowing this to go unchecked. If I allowed someone to call me reverend, or pastor, I have to correct that. And I have to say, no, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a reverend. I am just simply Levi. Yes, I preach, but I am not titled. The scripture tells us not to call anybody pastor, not to call anybody father. So, no, you see, that's the crux of the matter, CJ, because they don't consider it biblical at all. That's the whole problem. To the general viewer, the Bible has nothing to do with the titles. What you have is, to the general viewer, that's just simply the title depicts who they are, and shows that and it sets them up as a religious person, the leader of the flock, if you will. So they would simply look at it as, this is a person who leads the church, not necessarily not that it would be biblical. And let's go ahead and address that too while we're at it. Most of these movies don't have anything to do with the Bible. to a very large degree, we need to be very, very careful, again, what we allow our eyes and our mind and our hearts to consume. We, as children of the book, children of God, should not be allowing things that are unclean to pass our eyes or our ears. And I think that's a good way to look at it, CJ. You see, a lot of Christians, especially family, people with families, what the what the teaching or the trend is going as now is that the father and mother of the family will be watching a video or a movie, let's say, with the kids, and when they see or hear something, they will typically pause the video and use it as a teaching moment to instruct the children that this is not acceptable. This is not what should be going on.
Mhm.
Night, night.
Sleep.
No, not sweet. Sleep. Yep, sleep tight.
Sleep.
Sweet dreams. Love you. Say it right. Love. Love. Love you. Peaceful rest. You're forgetting your S. Peaceful rest. Peace. Peaceful rest.
Night.
God
Night. Night. Good night, y'all.
bless. Night, night. Yes, you talked about being holy in, people of holiness, people that are, because God wants us to be a royal priesthood, a holy nation. And we need to we need to make sure that our lives reflect that principle. So when we watch movies, we need to be careful. If the movie has explicit scenes in it that are against what God wants, God has us. God wants basically what God commands us. If it has scenes which we know are against the righteousness of God, we need to not watch these movies. Partaking of them, then knowing that there is fornication, there is murder, there is revelings, lasciviousness, things like that, sexual parties, drunken orgies, that type of thing that are going on. And if we consume them, then we are falling in the category of Romans 1:32, which says that who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death. Folks, it doesn't matter how much protection or how much these things don't actually happen in real life within that movie as they're filming that movie. The fact that they're portraying this is enough to trigger verse 32. Okay, because they are thereby depicting it. And those who know the judgment of God that says that those who participate in this, those who commit such things, are worthy of death. They not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Now, I know that when Sean watches this video later, he's probably going to have a ton of questions for me, which is fine. Bring them on, Sean. And he probably won't agree with what I've said either, to a degree. But that's okay. I'm not the leading authority on this. The scriptures are. Let's look and change topic just a little bit, and go to the idea of reverend. In Psalm 111, verse 9, Psalm 111, verse 9. The psalmist says, He sent redemption unto his people. He hath commanded his covenant forever. Holy and reverend is his name. We want to look at the word reverend right there, which comes from the Hebrew. It is H number 3372 in the Strongs, and it means or the word is yare, and it means to fear, morally revere, causatively to frighten or affright, be or make afraid, dreadful, put in fear, to be had in reverence, see or terrible act. If we move over to Brown Driver Briggs, we see that it is, again, to fear or to revere, to be afraid. And interestingly enough, it says to shoot or pour. To stand in awe of, to be awed, to fear, reverence, honor, or respect. To be fearful or to be dreadful, to be feared, to cause astonishment, awe, to be held in awe, to inspire reverence or godly fear or awe, to make afraid or terrify. Yes, O'Shea, that is a lot of things that could be that could fall under the word reverend, or for the definition. Take a look at the KJC, O'Shea. What we see here is in the King James Concordance of the Bible, the word yare is found 316 times. It is translated 148 times as fear, 78 times as afraid, 39 times as feared, 30 times as terrible, 5 times as dreadful, 3 times as reverence, twice feareth, once as affright, once as dread, once as durst, fearest, fearfully, fearing, reverend, see, and terribleness. All of those once. Let's look at some examples of wherein the word reverend or yare is used. Genesis 15:1. Genesis 15:1 says, after these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Yare not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. God tells Abram to not be afraid, to fear not, to reverend not. Now, let's look at Leviticus 19, and we're going to, there's several places in here. Let's start with 19, verse 3. Leviticus 19, verse 3. Ye shall fear every man his mother. Boy, ain't that the truth. And his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. The word fear there, it's the same one as reverend in Psalm 111, verse 9. And as we just read in Genesis 15:1. It's the same word. We could say then that you shall reverend your every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. It's the same connotation. You shall fear every man his mother. They and father, they are worthy of that honor and respect. Remember the commandment in Exodus chapter 20? Honor your father and mother. They're deserving of that respect, that fear. It brings new meaning to it, doesn't it, Oshad? But let's skip down to verse 32. Bob is very scary. So is CJ. I'm not even sure CJ is still with us. I think he's sleeping. Either that or he's typing in a long Sean Worthy comment. Leviticus 19, verse 32. Huh?
I'm listening and now typing to Randy.
Thou shalt rise up before the hoary head and honor the face of the old man and fear thy God. I am the Lord. The word fear there's that reverence again. That reverend, actually, not reverence, reverend. So these are just a few of the examples where this word is used, and we can see that it applies to God. It applies to where God tells Abraham, do not fear because I am here, in other words. And then he tells the children of Israel, you shall fear every man his father and mother, his mother and father. Let's see here. I want to try a different one. In Isaiah 41, verse 10. Isaiah 41, verse 10. O'Shea, would you read that? My throat's starting to kind of itch and scratch.
Okie dokie.
Ow.
Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee, yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Can you tell someone to close this door?
Is someone over there to close that door? There's nobody in the dining room. Could you go close the door for O'Shea? Huh? Can he? I suppose he probably could by now. Your mother is ensconced on the couch under 5 blankets with this lovely warmth of fire right here. I'll wait for you. We're going to be going to Jeremiah 5:22 when you get back. But what we're I hope I'm kind of giving you the picture that reverend is not the only use of that word. Yes, holy and fearful, holy and awesome, holy and awe-inspiring is God's name. And it needs to be held in that reverence, because remember that he says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. That's giving God's name that proper place. And that's really what reverend means, is to give God that proper place of reverence. But there are other things that we are to do with reverend. We are to fear or honor our mother and father. In Jeremiah 5 and verse 22, after having, God has told Abram back in Genesis not to be afraid. Yet he tells Israel to fear their parents and to fear God. He says in Isaiah, do not fear, because I'm here, and I will strengthen thee. In other words, don't fear what other people can do to you. Don't give them that place of honor that is reserved for me. Rather, he says, I am with you. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my hand, with the right hand of my righteousness. But now let's look at Jeremiah 5:22. As soon as O'Shea shuts the door and sits down. Did you need a drink or something, bud?
I can read too if you want.
Yeah, I'll have you do that. I needed him to get to the Jeremiah 5:22. You can go ahead and read this one if you're not too busy typing at the moment.
Fear ye not me, saith the Lord. Will ye not tremble at my presence, which I place the sand for the bountiful sea by a perpetual decree, and it cannot pass it. And though the waves thereof toss themselves, yet can they not avail? Though they roar, yet can they not pass over it.
God says there that essentially, why are you not fearing me? Why do you not hold me in that proper place of respect and honor? He says here, well, won't you tremble at my presence? Remember, we're talking about God. We're talking about the Holy One of Israel. We're talking about the creator of all the world And he goes on to elaborate and use that very argument here in this passage. Why don't you tremble at my presence? I am the one that placed the sand as a bound for the sea, and I did it with a perpetual decree. This is a decree that's not ending, in other words, one that is constantly maintained. The sea cannot pass it. Though the waves toss themselves up on the sea, on the shore, they will not prevail on that sand, on that beach. Though they roar, they're not going to make it any farther than the beach. They're not going to overcome God's decree, and you're not fearing him. The difference between calling a religious figure reverend and what we're discussing tonight, is the fact that they are taking a title and a description for which they have no authority to have. Let me illustrate. In Psalm 111, verse 9, the psalmist makes the point that God's name is holy and reverend, holy and worthy of fear, awe, and reverence. Is your name worthy of fear? Is your name worthy of reverence? Is your title, or rather, is your position in the church worthy of that honor, reverence, and fear? Even the elders of a congregation do not have that authority. Yes, we must respect the elders and submit to them. But they are our brethren. And that means that they are equal to us. God hasn't given them the right to take the description of reverend. God has not given a preacher that right. We are indeed, according to 1 Peter chapter 2, we are a holy nation. We are a royal priesthood. We are a peculiar people. We are living stones, but we are not reverend. And there is a difference between the action that we are to carry out in regard to our parents or our elders, and even in regard to our God. For you see, the Yare is an action. It's not telling me whether it's not a noun. And it's used with that prepositional phrase: to fear, to revere, to be afraid. It's an action that we do. It is not a title. It is a description of God and his name. It is not a title, and it is not a description of man. Now, before we close the study on the word reverend, there is another word that is closely aligned in our English language, and that is reverence. And I want to look at the word reverence. Reverend was, well, let's, O'Shea, go back to that one in the Greek or in the Hebrew, would you? What is the number on that? H3372. Reverence. Or reverend, rather. If you scroll down in the KJC, one of the descriptions of that is the word reverence. And it's used 3 times in that manner. And those 3 times are found Leviticus, twice in Leviticus, once in Psalm. And all 3 of them show something done to God, if I remember correctly. Leviticus 19:30. What does that one tell us?
Ye shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary.
They
I
can't do
am the
that.
Lord. Then the next one. Ye
They
shall
can't do
keep
that.
my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. And then in Psalms, God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints, and to be had in reverence of all them that are about him.
Okay, they needed to see that while you're reading them. Okay, so that's just one of the words of reverence, and that's one of the definitions of yare. Now, there's another word that's used in regard to reverence, and we're going to find the first one of those in 2 Samuel 9 and verse 6. And let's go ahead. CJ, can you read this one?
Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came unto David, he fell on his face and did reverence. And David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, Behold, thy servant.
Yeah, I just realized I gave you that hard name, Mephibosheth. My apologies. Okay, so Mephibosheth did reverence to David. Okay, to the king. What do we learn from that use of the word here? They're going to type. While you look at that, I wonder where Ruben went to. H7812 is the Strong's word, and that's shakah, and it means to depress or prostrate, especially reflexively in homage to a royalty or to God. In other words, it's to bow down oneself, to crouch or fall down flat, humbly beseech to do or make obeisance, to do reverence and to make to stoop and to worship. So O'Shea says he feared and respected David's position. If it had been any other person as king, he would have done the same. And I think you're exactly right. And what we see here with Shaka is the idea that reverence and worship are the exact same. They're used interchangeably. Who do we worship? Well, obviously we worship God, right? All right. If David was just a poor farmer, Mephibosheth wouldn't have respected him or worshipped him in the same way. David's a really good case to bring to point because if you remember when Saul had rejected God by failing to wait for Samuel and offering a sacrifice to God before Samuel came, because remember, Samuel told him, go to, I think it's Shiloh, and wait there for 3 days. I'll join you, and then we'll have a sacrifice. And Samuel went there. He waited for the time to the time required, and Samuel had not showed up. So Saul looks around him. Men are starting to grumble and leave. So he fears that he's going to lose all the men, and so he offers a sacrifice. As he's finishing the sacrifice, here comes Samuel. Okay. So Samuel tells him, because you've rejected God, God has rejected you from being king. If you had have waited and had have, held him in that proper place, then God would have established you as king of Israel forever. But now, because you didn't, he has rejected you from being king and is going to seek a man after his own heart. So we know the story. God send Samuel down to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, and Jesse calls his sons and makes them to pass before Samuel. And Samuel is commanded to anoint David, the son of Jesse, as the next king of Israel. Now, David has just been anointed king, and yet we see that David refuses to raise his hand against Saul all the days that Saul was alive. David respected Saul as king because he was God's anointed. He did reverence to the position. Even though Saul tried to kill him multiple times, he refused to raise his hand every single time. David could certainly have said, well, I've been raised as king. I've been moved up as king. I've already pointed that one out, guys. I've already read that one. God has, oh no, I haven't actually. I said, O'Shea says, and I say that to point out that he was giving reverence to the title and position, not the person in it necessarily. It was probably a little bit of both, O'Shea, because remember, David was a dear friend of Jonathan's. Mephibosheth was not a young child at this point in his life. Mephibosheth was a grown man. And so he knew David as a friend of his dad's. So there was a little bit of both, I think. And I might be reading too much into that. But anyhow, back on topic. David certainly could have said, "Well, I'm king now. I've been anointed king, and since God has rejected you, I'm going to take over." He would have been more than likely well within his rights, but Saul was still alive. And we're not told that God had ended Saul's kingship, only that David had been anointed to be the next king over Israel. And so David consistently reverenced the position of Saul as God's anointed. And so we have Mephibosheth reverencing David as king. We have Bathsheba doing the same thing to King David as the king is very old and lying in bed, and you have Adonijah striving to take over as king. You have the same word, the reverence, being used in regard to Mordecai not reverencing Haman. Esther 3, 2, and 5. And of course, we could go through a whole bunch of uses of the word reverence or reverenced in all of its usages, because there is, again, a lot of those. Suffice it to say, though, the point I'm making is that we are to give reverence to people that are in positions of authority. Fathers and mothers have been put in positions of authority by God. Kings, presidents, judges, sheriffs, supervisors, our bosses, our work supervisors. These are all people, and even law enforcement, other law enforcement as well, have been put into positions of authority and therefore are worthy of that reverence that we are to, that we are to give according to God. And this reverence is the idea of the respect, the honor. Not that we're going to go prostrate ourselves on the ground before the local police officer. So, Reverend, God's name is definitely holy, and it's worthy of all the respect, awe, fear, and reverence that we can give it, worship that we can give it. As we showed when we were looking at the word yare, but there are positions of authority within this world that we are also to give respect and honor to. The difference is only God's name is reverent. and it is never used as a title. So for us to use it as a title means that it is would be wrong, just as wrong as us using the title father or master, rabbi, teacher, uh, elder, presbyter, bishop. We're not to call any man on earth these names as in title. You don't see Peter going around saying, I am the apostle. I'm Apostle Peter." You don't see him going around saying, "I am Elder Peter," because he was both an apostle and an elder. He says, "I am Peter, an apostle and an elder." Same thing with Paul. One final interesting point on the word reverence. When we get to the idea of reverence in the New Testament, let me hit that one first. CJ, would you read Psalm 89, verse 7? Since I gave you that hard name of Mephibosheth. Psalm 89, verse 7.
Sorry, I'm here, but I'm not here. Psalm 89:7.
As soon as O'Shea gets there.
God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints, and to be had in reverence of all them that are about him.
So, is God on the same level as the rest of us in terms of reverence due? Absolutely not. God is to be greatly feared, is greatly to be feared. God is to be greatly reverenced, to be had in reverence. You and I don't have that authority. You and I don't have that position. And we certainly don't have that title. There is no man on this earth that is worthy of that title. Larry just texted me, O'Shea, Greg and Tanya Gare from a brother and sister from the Harlan congregation. Their son Grant died this evening in a car accident near Irwin on his way home from work. He was 20. We'll want to pray for the family, for the Gare family.
He just hit me with that text as well. I'm sending my condolences.
Send them for me as well, as I'm in the stream.
His sheep are the ones that actively hear and actively follow.
You're still activated, CJ.
Hi.
That was hilariously out of fit.
I'm like, how is that regarding our topic of reverence here? All right. In regard to reverence, the New Testament has some use of the word, of course, not the Hebrew word, but has some use of the word reverence in it. And I want to look at them. There are a total of about 6. Yes, 6 passages regarding or using the word reverence, and 3 of those passages comes from the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and is in reference to the parable of the vineyard, or the word, the vineyard keepers, where the Lord has a vineyard and he hires some vine dressers to keep the vineyard. And when it comes time for his crops, or his harvest, he sends some servants. They kill him. He eventually sends his son, saying they will reverence him. And I know that they murder the son as well. But the other 3 passages are found in Ephesians 5:33, Hebrews 12:9, and 12:28. Ephesians 5:33 is a very touchy one because it deals with marriage, and people do not want to hear this very well. You will get a lot of flack.
Where am I headed?
From our brothers and especially our sisters in regard to this. Ephesians 5:33. It's seen, and it's because some brothers have browbeat the sisters with it. Look at what Jesus says through the Apostle Paul. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself. So we start off with the basis of our relationship with our wife is that one of love. And then Paul turns and he says, and the wife, see that she reverence her husband. And yes, that word reverence comes from phobio. Does that ring a bell?
Phobia?
Yes. Phobio.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm trying to remember an instance.
Sam, do you know, does that word ring a bell to you? How about you,
Phobia,
Carol? Ah, you're right. It is the basis for phobia.
which is a fear of.
Mm-hmm.
Larry
The
says,
word there for reverence is to frighten. That is passively, to be alarmed. By analogy, to be in awe of. That is to revere. Folks, a marriage relationship is built first upon love for each other, and a respect for each other's position. If you read the rest of the chapter, especially beginning, I think, in verse 21, reading through verse 33, you see that the husband, is to love the wife even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. And then we as the church, we reverence Christ our Lord. Do we not? And Paul draws the same analogy. See, Christ loved us and gave himself for us. And then he set up these positions within the church that we are to have. And he said, way back at creation, set up these positions in marriage. We should never use our position to instigate the trembling in your boots or abusive relationship, that people have done so. A wife cannot truly reverence her husband if it is built on abuse. And by the same token, a husband finds it difficult to love his wife if it's founded upon abuse. Whether it be abuse of a physical or mental nature, or abuse of positional nature. Looking into Hebrews 12 verses 9 and 28, 9 says that we have fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. You and I, as we were growing up, reverenced our fathers because we know that they loved us, but they also corrected us, punished us when we were wrong. They should also have praised us when we were right. God loves us when we do wrong and when we do right, but he corrects us when we do wrong, and he rewards us when we do right. In 28, we receive a kingdom that cannot be moved. So we are to Hebrews 12:28, but we are to have. Why don't you read that one? I'm struggling.
Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear.
So what we see then is that because we have received that kingdom, which, like Jesus said back in Matthew chapter 16, verses 18 and 19, the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Nothing can move the kingdom. God has installed it where it's at, and it ain't changing. We are to have grace, grace towards one another, grace towards the world, whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. So we need to have that, and that's a different reverence, by the way. That's a hidosi. Funny because it looks like a eidos. Ahidos. What it is, it's ahidos. Downcast eyes, bashfulness, that is modesty. Modesty towards God, shamefacedness, awe, reverence. So we are to serve God with awe, with modesty, with shamefacedness, and with caution, reverence, piety, dread, fear, godly fear. And the word is eulabia. So as we wrap up our study of Father, titles, and reverend, I hope that I haven't just caused the water to be completely muddied. The conclusion is this: no one on this earth is to receive a title of teacher, master, father, Rabbi. Same thing goes for pastor, bishop, presbyter, elder. This is what we see with these words is the description of the job, not the title that goes with it. Because we are all brothers. That means we're all equal. My status is a servant of God. Your status is a servant of God. I don't hold any more authority than you do. You don't hold any more authority than I do. And because of that, you and I can then bear one another's burdens. We can then be hitched to the same plow and create the same furrow because we're pulling in the traces together as equal partners. But as Christian brothers and sisters, there are certain things that we do need to give reverence to. Romans 13 tells us that we are to reverence the governments that God has established as rulers over us. Hebrews chapter 12 and 13 tells us that we are to give honor, respect, reverence to the elders that rule well. We are to respect them, we are to submit to them. Ephesians 5 tells us that in the marriage, we are to love one another and that we ought to have the right reverence and hold that reverence, whether it be for Christ or for the positions that God has set for us. And finally, foremost and always, God's name is reverend. It is holy. And it is deserving, demanding of our reverence. There is no man on this earth that receives that position. To watch a movie wherein a religious figure is called a father, pastor, elder, brother, or not brother, bishop or presbyter, and even a brother, um, to hold a title that God has not authorized is not the same as us calling a person that. However, we must be careful what we allow our eyes and our ears to consume. Because what we take in is what's eventually going to find its way out. And as Jesus has said, that which proceeds from the mouth defiles a man. That which proceeds from the heart, rather. And it can also be that which sanctifies a man. To watch movies which glorify or depict sins that are wrong, such as explicit scenes, scenes of drunkenness, revelings, murder, pornography, sexual immorality, or deviance, or other things that fall into the categories of sin that God has condemned. Watching these type of movies, we are consuming with our eyes and our ears. And we can be accused of taking pleasure in them that do them when we know that they are worthy of death according to the judgment of God. Romans chapter 1, verse 32. Ultimately, I cannot pass judgment upon my brother for what he or she is able to handle. If, however, I know that they have a certain restriction that they follow, and I invite them into my house or invite them out to watch or to partake of such a venue of entertainment, then I am guilty of causing my brother or sister to stumble. And so I stand in greater condemnation. Just as much as if I have a problem with that type of stuff and I sit and I watch said movie. Because for me, knowing that that is wrong, it wounds my conscience. And to that, Paul says, Romans chapter 14, that is sin. I hope, as I said, that I have helped to clarify and I haven't fully muddied the water. You must make that decision for yourself. It's not my business. If you need help, well, I'm sure CJ's willing to help study it out, as am I. Ask questions. We'll be sure to help you answer. And we hope that you have been encouraged, strengthened, educated through the scripture to have a closer daily walk with God. That way, whether we wake tomorrow to serve Him here on this earth, or we wake up tomorrow to serve Him up there, you know where we'll be, for I'll see you then.